your process and how that helped.
Sure, I think there are a couple different perspectives from here. So the first and foremost is, I'm going to guess that there are a lot of very strong women in this room, a lot of strong women who have taken care of their kids, taken care of their family, taken care of their job, taken care of all those things, and in the entire time you never asked for help. I will tell you that the number one thing that I leaned into was vulnerability. My entire life it was about proving that I could do everything. And when my 8-year-old daughter caught me falling down the stairs, that is the definition of vulnerability. It was only then that I could turn around and ask for help. It takes courage to ask for help. It takes courage to go to a bereavement service. It takes courage to do all of those things. So when you are in any type of situation, I implore you to begin to ask for help. The second thing that I would say is this: from a medical perspective, your doctor only cares about what your doctor is doing. My neurosurgeon only cared that he cut the tumor out of my head. It was up to me to then put together all of the other resources that I had. One of the things that I learned that is really important, if you have anybody that's in the healthcare system at any point, ask everybody who walks in the room the exact same question. How do you think he's doing? What do you think is going to happen next? Because when you ask the nurse, you ask the physical therapist, you ask the respiratory therapist, you ask the doctor, you're all going to get all different answers, but putting those all together gives you the understanding of what's actually going on. So for me, and I tried I've been to a rolfer, I've been to an acupuncturist, I've been to a chiropractor, I've been to you name it to try and put my health back together. So it's reaching out and finding all sorts of alternative therapies.
Wonderful, thank you. And Jesse, you had mentioned stigma when you were speaking. Can you please share with the group your perception on the stigma regarding drug dependency and what you're trying to do to help?
Well, I think all of us, no one here is alive before we declared the war on drugs. And so there just is an automatic stigma in society about people who use drugs, and they're seen as people that are morally flawed or that have some sort of a deficit. And that's just simply not true. So that is a big part of the stigma that you face. And when you first start grappling with the fact that your child is using drugs, and not using drugs like maybe in college they experimented with their friends in a party, you probably don't even always know about that, but a lot of people experience that kind of thing. But when addiction sets in, which doesn't happen with everybody who uses highly addictive drugs, there is a stigma. And the child knows that there's a stigma, or not the young person, the person. And so they hide what they do. They, in school, a generation ago, we were all subject, I wasn't, I'm too old for it, but the DARE program, and that was all about, you will get in trouble with the law. It was nothing about, here's what you do if you find yourself in a situation, here's some of the perils, here's some of the different drugs, here's some of the harm reduction initiatives, here's just a whole education. We didn't do that. We just said, drugs are bad, don't use them, and it was the whole just say no era. And so all of that then contributed to the shame that people felt. So these kids that were taught that way, when they do use, they use alone, and they end up dying alone if they are incarcerated. So the stigma just goes on and on and on. Once you get out of your time in incarceration, you can't get a job because you have a record. And so again, it's the stigma. And if you have diabetes, and that's in sometimes, I'm not a doctor. I don't have anybody in my family with diabetes, but just grabbing for an example. Sometimes that's self-inflicted. And you have a doctor that cares for you and they give you medication that you need and that monitors you. If you go out and eat a box of cookies, nobody's gonna put you in jail. But when you use drugs, they don't see it as the medical condition that it is. It is a medical condition. And if you relapse, which is akin to eating the box of cookies, you go to jail. And if you're put into a program and you relapse, you're put back in jail. And it's just a vicious cycle. And so the way that stigma plays out, it's not like any other health condition. And that is one thing I learned, that my son in particular was not well served by 12-step programs, and I'm not saying that no one is, but he had a language impairment. He didn't want to sit around and talk with a group of people, sharing his innermost feelings or whatever, nor did he need to redeem himself because he had been mistreated. He had been misunderstood. It wasn't him being the bad person. He was just reacting to it. But yet he was so ashamed of himself, too. And I think most people relapse, and you go a longer period of time without relapsing, and that's the trajectory toward wellness, and he was definitely on it. But that last relapse, he had nowhere to go, and again, it's all stigma-based.
What are you doing to help change that outlook, public outlook?
Well, it's an uphill battle. Every group that I work with starts with saying, well, we have to address the stigma. Because you see, stigma prevents, for example, legislators from passing certain legislation. There's common sense legislation that would help with regard to prioritizing healthcare over punishment. But and I won't speak for everybody, and there are a lot of legislators that are really on board with passing these common sense laws, but most of them are reluctant because the constituents would see them as being soft on crime or pro-drug, but no one's pro-drug. But they can't take that risk, and that is because of the stigma. So if we could educate the general public, we would be so much better off, but it's a catch-22 because all these groups that I work with, such good-hearted people, say we just have to beat the stigma, and we can't beat the stigma for behavior that we criminalize you for. So it's an uphill battle. I think we can enlighten more people, and there is more understanding of needing health care and not just redemption and harsh treatment. Even treatment facilities that my son went into, they were nice to him.
So, Tonia, I have the same question for you in terms of the role that stigma played in your journey and what you're doing now to change that perspective.
Well, the reason why I named my book such an in-your-face title, My Beautiful Black Son Died by Suicide, is because I wanted it to be very clear what the book was about. I wanted it to be easily found if a parent found themselves in the same situation and needed a resource. But the book in itself, I'm trying to help break the stigma because I do explain how successful my son was. I do explain that he wasn't this awkward kid that didn't have any choices. I try to explain that even though my hindsight is not 20/20, I still have a hard time understanding everything, but I do look back on some things that I could have done differently. But you only can do what you can do with the information that you have. And I was completely ignorant when it came to mental health. I thought I knew what it looked like. So I'm helping to break the stigma by writing the book. And I've also started a company called Healing Out Loud. And I'm going to make mental health a high priority. And I'm also going to help with grief if someone is grieving.
And could you explain the term that you lost your son to suicide?
Yes, so traditionally the term was committed suicide. Since I've lost him, I've learned that that is a very insensitive statement because of more understanding of basically just what the brain is going through when you're in that moment. And it's been because of people that have attempted but survived, and they've done research to talk to them about what was happening in that moment, and they literally feel driven. They don't feel like there is any other choice. Unfortunately for men, they choose more lethal ways So they don't, sorry, and today's my son's birthday, so if I'm a little emotional, he would have been 27. And yesterday was her son's birthday, so. All right, so unfortunately with men, they a lot of times choose an option where they don't get to tell their story as to what they were going through in that moment. But you commit murder. You do not commit suicide. It is not a choice.
Thank you for explaining that, 'cause I think a lot of people weren't aware of that.
Yes, so I say loss, or I say died by suicide.
Thank you. Becca, could you explain the role of work stress during your journey, and how has your outlook changed after living through what you've lived through?
Sure, so, I just need a moment after that. So, when I worked for the state, I would walk home at, 10:30 at night, and my husband would say, "You're home early." I went weeks on end without putting my 5-year-old, 6-year-old, and 7-year-old daughter to bed. I never once went to school when she was in 2nd grade or 3rd grade. I have no idea who her teachers were, I have no idea what her homework was, and I have no idea what my family's life was without me for those 2 years. And it is the biggest regret of my life. During that time period when I was so stressed out, I chose other outlets. I didn't believe that my family could understand what was going on, and we began to just completely separate. When I was diagnosed, my husband went to every single doctor's appointment with me. He took notes at every single doctor's appointment, and he stood by me. I completely fell in love with my husband all over again. And I will tell you that my boundaries, I did not have boundaries when I was working at the exchange. I believed so strongly in what we were doing that it was so important that I would have worked 24 hours a day if I could have physically worked 24 hours a day. But now my boundaries are such that when I shut down at the end of the day, I shut down at the end of the day. I don't have my phone near me for hours on end. When my family is in front of me, my family is in front of me. Those are so important to me. The joke we were talking yesterday, and I didn't get an email after noon on Friday because I don't check my emails after noon on Friday, and I don't look at them until Monday. I took my phone, my email, work email off my phone. Right, so those boundaries are so strong now just because I never want to be that person again.
Boundaries are so important. I think as women, oftentimes we give, kind of topic of this seminar. How have you mentioned some how your boundaries have changed. How else have they changed in your life?